You know, this week is talking about cholesterol. So if you were here last week, we talked about blood pressure, things that we can do in our own life to maybe improve it or manage that. And so we're kind of going in this sequence. So if you're new to this one, as a reminder, I'm Pete Janacek. I'm the wellness specialist alongside Kristen Fannin and Thomas Seavey. So we wanted to provide you guys opportunities to hear a little bit more about what we can do when we maybe get values back from our provider or our doctor that we're like, oh, that's kind of maybe not what I thought it was going to be, or it's looking great. So these are things that I may be doing that I can continue doing. And we wanted to highlight on a couple different areas. So like I mentioned, this week is cholesterol. So we're going to talk about a couple different things, but first, what is cholesterol, right? So cholesterol is a type of lipid. It's a waxy fat-like substance that your liver produces naturally. It's vital for the formation of cell membranes, certain hormones, and vitamin D. So it's not inherently a bad thing. I think that a lot of us hear about cholesterol and how terrible it is, right? But there's obviously a function for it. Cholesterol doesn't dissolve in water, so it can travel through our blood on its own. And to help transport cholesterol, your liver produces lipoproteins. So lipoproteins are particles made from fat and protein. They carry that cholesterol and triglycerides, which is another type of lipid, through your bloodstream. And that's kind of where we see this cholesterol come from. So when we're talking about cholesterol, there are two major forms. And we have low density lipoprotein and we have high density lipoprotein. So that LDL, or I put it in red because that's typically what you hear people say for the bad cholesterol, right? Which obviously good and bad here nor there, but that's typically a level that we want to keep lower, whereas high density lipoprotein is that more of that good cholesterol that we like to see at a higher value than the LDL. So if your blood contains too much LDL cholesterol, you might be diagnosed with high cholesterol, and without treatment, high cholesterol may lead to many health issues, including heart attack and stroke, which are the two leading causes of death in the United States. And so that's obviously a topic of concern and something that we want to be able to manage better. So when we look at cholesterol, there's a couple different values that you probably see when you come across your values from a doctor. The first is total cholesterol. So this is a measure of total cholesterol, including LDL, HDL, and triglycerides, which is kind of the three that we just talked about. So our low density lipoprotein, or LDL, is the primary carriers of cholesterol in blood because their main role is to deliver cholesterol to both peripheral and liver cells. So it's carrying this cholesterol. Whereas high density lipoprotein, or that HDL, or that good cholesterol, absorbs that cholesterol in our blood and carries it back to the liver, which the liver then flushes it from the body. So if we think about if we have too much LDL, right, and we don't have enough HDL, then we're not able to get rid of that extra cholesterol in our body because the HDL, there's not enough of them to say, hey, come on, let's get out of here, right through the liver. Triglycerides are a type of fat in your blood that your body uses for energy. The combination of high levels of triglycerides with low HDL, so low good cholesterol, or high LDL, or that more bad cholesterol as you typically hear it, can lead to an increased risk for cardiovascular diseases and complications. So when we look at cholesterol and triglyceride levels in adults, I wanted to put up a little table here because I think it's easier to kind of see that way. Obviously, high cholesterol also has another name, which is hyperlipidemia. So if you hear that, that's the same thing. So it's interchangeable. And that's just cholesterol that's higher than normal. Obviously, it's dependent on the type of cholesterol. So when we look at total cholesterol, there's no low total cholesterol consideration right now, but a good cholesterol, or total cholesterol, sorry, is going to be less than 200. Borderline is going to be 200 to 239. That's borderline high. And then high is going to be 240 or greater. And with HDL, so we're looking at the second line there, starting at the bottom, if you're less than 40 for HDL, that is when we're maybe wanting to get that level up a little bit. And we'll kind of talk about ways we can do that. Borderline, there's not anything high. There's NA on here, which is not applicable, but there is some concern if our HDL levels do surpass like around 60. So just be cognizant of that and aware that, you know, we don't want HDL to go completely through the roof, but we want it to kind of be above that 40 range. And then LDL, low, not applicable at this point. Good, LDL cholesterol is going to be less than 100. Borderline, so a little bit higher on that scale is going to be 130 to 159. And 160 or higher is going to be considered that really high LDL. Triglycerides, same thing. Good triglycerides are less than 150, and borderline 150 to 199. If you're at 200 or higher, then that's something that we'll want to look into. So ideal levels: total cholesterol less than 200. HDL for men is going to be greater than 40, women greater than 50. There is a difference there. And then LDL is less than 100 and triglycerides less than 150. And so when you go in, you get your biometric screenings, you get your numbers back, just try to look to see where you're at on that or compare if you've already had that done. So what are the symptoms of high cholesterol? And if you were in the meeting last week, you know that I mentioned that even blood pressure, high blood pressure, is more of a silent condition until it gets extreme. And this is similar. So in most cases, it is a silent condition. It typically doesn't cause any symptoms. And many people don't even realize they have high cholesterol until they develop serious complications such as heart attack or stroke. And that's obviously too little too late, right? So we want to make sure that we're checking in on these things on a consistent and regular basis. So this slide didn't pop up earlier. I don't know why. My slides are being a little funky, but we talked about what it is, what cholesterol is, what it's considered normal for cholesterol levels, what are the symptoms of high cholesterol. So now we're going to talk about why it's important to keep our cholesterol within that normal range and also talk about how it can impact us. So why is having a normal cholesterol important? And obviously we talked about the risks of, you know, cardiovascular issues, heart stuff, strokes, but having high blood cholesterol can lead to buildup called plaque on your walls of your arteries. You guys have probably heard this term before. And as this plaque builds, so if you think about, you know, your pipes at home, if you get hard water buildup over time, you're like losing the flow, right? You're losing that good flow through it. And this narrows that blood flow to and from your heart and other organs, which obviously we want to make sure that we can have that smooth flow of blood between all those important organs. So if we're shrinking that because of this plaque, that can cause some issues. When blood flow to the heart is blocked, it can cause chest pain, or it's called angina, or a heart attack, also called a myocardial infarction. So those are obviously extreme, and we would hope that we would catch it before that point, but those are just some of the things that can occur. So what else should I know? Some risk factors for cholesterol, or things like having type 2 diabetes and or obesity, eating a diet that's high in saturated and trans fats, which we'll discuss a little bit more too. Physical inactivity, family history of high cholesterol, and smoking. So just remember that that genetic component is there, just like it is with blood pressure. So if you know you have a family member who struggled with cholesterol, high cholesterol levels, that's something that you'll just want to know and maybe talk to your doctor about. If they ask if you have any family history, be like, hey, you know, I know this family member of mine struggles with their cholesterol levels, you know, can we check that out and make sure that I'm good to go there? Recommendation for cholesterol checks. Most healthy adults, so people who don't have any predisposition or don't have any issues typically, should have their cholesterol checked every 4 to 6 years. I would encourage you to go more often than that, just because things can change from one year to the next. And some people, such as those who have heart disease, diabetes, or a family history of high cholesterol, obviously need to get their cholesterol checked more often. And that can be one of the big important parts of getting our health screenings done, going into our doctor on a regular basis to make sure that we're having those things checked. So how do I improve it? This is another conversation that you're probably going to say same things last week. Gosh, I've seen some of this stuff before, but I think it's a good reminder and ways that we can figure out how to improve these levels. by the means that we have control over. So what are some things that we can do to improve cholesterol? One is getting at least 150 minutes of exercise in each week. So that can be, 30 minutes, 5 days a week, and just getting that exercise in to help in general, right, our overall health, but also to help with lowering blood cholesterol. And then quit smoking. This is another one that I talked about last week that we know is difficult. It's not easy, but it's something that, if you're really hoping to improve a lot of areas of your health, that's a way to get started. Managing your stress, obviously, is always a big one. Weight management, eating a healthy diet, and if necessary, there's always situations where, especially if it's genetic or it's gotten to a serious point, there might need to be some sort of medication intervention. So physical activity, not being physically active is a risk factor for heart disease. And regular physical activity can help lower those LDL cholesterol levels and raise HDL cholesterol levels. So even like we talked about last week, just getting started, right? You don't have to go from never working out, never, doing any physical activity to then doing every single day we're up and at it, right? It's just how can we get started and go from, point A to point B. And maybe that's, hey, I can do 30 minutes on 2 of the days this week. That's a great starting point. Let's get started somewhere. Smoking cessation. So cigarette smoking lowers your HDL cholesterol. And as a reminder, HDL helps to remove that bad cholesterol from your arteries. So it's really important that we're able to manage that. Stress management. Research has shown that chronic stress can sometimes raise your LDL cholesterol and lower your HDL cholesterol. So if you're on the conversation last week, we talked about the situational stress and how there's, our situational stress, and then there's our chronic stress. And chronic stress is a big one that we want to avoid because that is the one that's going to kind of have the most impact overall on our health. And so if we're constantly stressed out, this can obviously lead your LDL cholesterol levels to be, outside the range that we want it to be. Weight management, being overweight is a risk factor for heart disease. It also tends to increase your cholesterol. Losing weight can help lower your LDL cholesterol, total cholesterol, and triglyceride levels. So obviously that's another area that we'd like to work on. So how diet impacts our levels. The biggest influence on blood cholesterol level is the mix of fats and carbohydrates in your diet, not necessarily the amount of cholesterol you eat from food. So although it remains important to be aware of the amount of cholesterol that you eat, so if you're flipping over a product from the store and you're seeing that cholesterol amount, it's important to be aware of that. But for most people, dietary cholesterol is not as problematic as it's once believed. I bring up the comments about eggs all the time and how eggs had a lot of cholesterol, and then we found out that maybe that wasn't directly impacting our blood cholesterol levels. So our dietary cholesterol and our blood cholesterol are seen as semi-separate in that regard, but it's still important to keep an eye on that, right? But as a result of that and knowing that, hey, maybe it's not as problematic as we once thought, the dietary guidelines for Americans did remove the recommendation of restricting dietary cholesterol to 300 milligrams per day, just because there wasn't that correlation that they had seen before. So although it's important to look at it, just know that it's probably not for most people going to directly impact those cholesterol levels. We have a couple other things that we need to look at first. So high intakes of saturated fat and trans fats are the main culprits behind high cholesterol. So this is in, our processed and packaged foods, our higher cuts of fatty meats, our higher fat dairy products. Those are going to be a little bit more high on the saturated fat, as well as, pastries and things like that with saturated and trans fats. High intakes of highly processed carbohydrates may also cause an increase in unfavorable cholesterol. So what should we do, right? It's always the saying of like, okay, but what are we going to do now? So a couple things to just focus on if you're looking at cholesterol levels specifically are to increase soluble fiber intake, which we'll discuss a little bit more. Increase our fruit and vegetable intake because the compounds in fruits and vegetables called plant stanols or sterols work like soluble fiber to lower those LDL levels. We want to decrease that saturated and trans fat content by limiting processed and fatty cuts of meat, fried foods, and full fat dairy for the most part. Include an overall balance of each macronutrient. So that's that protein, fat, and carbs. We want a balance of those to make sure that we're able to manage that. And then increase omega-3 fat intake, which is like fatty fish, flaxseed, chia seeds, walnuts, all of those great things. So if we look at increasing soluble fiber is a form of fiber. So there's soluble and insoluble, but soluble is water soluble. So it dissolves in that water. And it binds around bile, which is composed of cholesterol, and removes it with your body's waste. So obviously that's helpful for us, right, to get that cholesterol out. And here are some soluble fiber options. So if you're looking for something to kind of include either on a daily basis or a more frequent basis, having things like dried beans, lentils, and split peas are going to be great options. Apples, pears, blackberries, and citrus fruits. Carrots, oats and oat bran and brown rice. Those are going to be some great options for soluble fiber that can help obviously rid some of that extra cholesterol. Limit saturated and trans fats. So we've kind of discussed this already, but saturated and trans fats tend to raise that LDL cholesterol level in the blood. Saturated fat occurs naturally in things like red meat and dairy products. Obviously, it doesn't mean that you need to avoid those. It's just try to look for those lower fat options or those leaner cuts. It's also found in baked goods and fried foods. So that's where you'll see that saturated and trans fats. And keeping saturated and trans fats as low as possible should be your goal. So ultimately, this is the conversation that maybe comes up about, well, what if I need to, go out to eat with my work group? What if I need to go out to eat for maybe after a work event with family, with friends? How do we make those good decisions? And just keeping those saturated and trans fats as low as possible should be your goal, as well as when you're at home and buying groceries for your own house. So when looking at nutrition facts label, I always say that anything with 3 grams or more of saturated fat should be avoided, or at least should be consumed with an understanding of what the rest of your day has looked like. So, I try to do my best, especially with the packaged food items, the frozen meals, things like that, to flip it over and look at that saturated fat content. Sometimes you'll be surprised. It'll be like 14 grams of saturated fat, and that's a lot for our bodies. So if we can manage that, obviously it's not to say that you can't ever have those items. It's just know what the rest of your day looks like and say, okay, I know that I had maybe a breakfast burrito that was frozen. It had a little bit higher saturated fat. So maybe for lunch, I want to avoid doing the same thing and getting a higher saturated fat item, opt for something different. And it's just that bird's eye view of your whole day and figuring out what changes or what things we can change throughout the day to improve that overall. And then obviously there are times when your cholesterol levels are concerning and your doctor may put you on medication to better control cholesterol alongside a diet change. I would always encourage you to ask questions to your provider, whether that's, hey, this is my first time finding out that my cholesterol is a little bit above what it's supposed to be. Like, what are your thoughts on if I took the opportunity to make those changes in my own life to see if that helped? There might be times when they're like, no, I'm so sorry. Like we're kind of worried that your levels are going to cause you issues. So this is when we obviously put you on a medication, but definitely ask questions. If you're kind of not wanting to take medication, if you feel that you're motivated enough to make those lifestyle changes and you feel like you can do that, ask those questions and just be like, hey, I really would like to try this first. Can we go, a couple months and see what happens? And so the U.S. Preventative Services Task Force released a final recommendation statement in August of 2022 on statin use for the primary prevention of cardiovascular disease in adults. The task force recommends people ages 40 to 75 who are at high risk for cardiovascular disease to take a statin to prevent a first heart attack or stroke. So again, those are just things that are put in place, but you can still ask questions about. And then people ages 40 to 75 who are at an increased risk, but not at high risk, should decide with their healthcare professional whether to take a statin or to try those interventions beforehand. So to recap, I know I kind of went through that quick. I want to make sure there's enough time for questions, but cholesterol is a type of lipid, so it's a type of fat. It's a waxy fat-like substance that your liver produces naturally. So when we talk about cholesterol, we're talking about typically that cholesterol that our liver is producing, not really the cholesterol from food as much. And it is useful as long as it's not produced in excess. So we want to make sure we have enough of that HDL or that good cholesterol to take it out of our body, so that we're able to then continue this process without having those high levels. It's extremely important to have your cholesterol checked regularly, as many people don't even realize that they have high cholesterol until they develop those serious complications or have a heart attack or have a stroke. And there are numerous things that we can do to improve our cholesterol levels or prevent them from increasing. And that is, we talked about engaging in regular physical activity. So what you feel comfortable in your life, whatever activity that is that works best for you, do that. If someone comes up to you and says, that you have to do a specific kind of exercise and you don't want to do that specific exercise, do whatever works for you. I think that's the biggest thing, is it's very individualized, and what I want to do is different than probably what most of you want to do. So figuring out what works best for you is going to be great. Working on ways to stop smoking. This is a great one to reach out to our health centers, ask them questions. They're always happy to help and can help you figure out ways to then move forward. Finding ways to manage our day-to-day stress. This is another one that is really important. I don't know the amount of people who have come to me, and although diet is a huge factor for a lot of these health issues, if you're not sleeping right, if you're not managing that stress, exercise and diet can only go so far, because our bodies then are in a state of constant stress. Managing our weight is going to be important too. Obviously, reach out. I'm happy to help. Kristen's happy to help. Thomas is happy to help. Our health centers are more than willing to help as well. Reach out to us if you ever have any questions on personalized plans, things that you can do. Eating a healthy diet, including an increase in soluble fiber, is going to be really important. Again, reach out. Happy to help you guys figure out what works best for you. And then intervening with medication, obviously, if necessary. I never want you guys to wait too long to take action with that if it's something that is just necessary to keep you guys safe. So with that, what questions can I answer for you guys? As a reminder, I have the wellness team listed here. So it's myself, Kristen, and Thomas. We're a resource for you guys. Reach out to any one of us. We're happy to help. And then the Duncan Aviation Family Health Centers at our Lincoln, Battle Creek, and Provo locations. There are their phone numbers. Give them a call if you have any specific questions. I had put a little disclaimer that I'm not a doctor, I'm a dietitian. So if you have any specific questions about your cholesterol or interventions as far as medication or anything like that, I would reach out to them and they would be a great resource for that. Kristen or Thomas, did you guys get any specific questions on your end? I'm not seeing any in the chat box right now.
I did not receive any on my end either.
Perfect. Well, if you guys have any questions after the fact, as always, reach out to any of us in the wellness team and we can get those answered. This will be recorded as we've recorded this whole time, then uploaded and sent to you guys. Next week, we'll be talking about blood glucose. So if you're interested in learning about blood sugars and how you can manage those, feel free to jump on same time next week.